Hey there, Squirrel Army. It is time for another deck tech here, and I chose one of the sub-commanders from one of the new commander decks, Ashnod the Uncaring, here to do a deck tech on. I think Ashnod is a very cool commander, very powerful commander. I actually think it's probably a bit better than Mishra in some ways, but also worse than Mishra in other ways. It has its own unique place, obviously, so you can do a whole lot with it. It's a very sacrificing-based themed deck, but hey, this is what I think would be an interesting deck for now, is to sort of have a deck that sacrifices things but also is based in recursion and having lots of creatures that we can keep bringing back from the graveyard, like Gravecrawler and things like that. So we might have some sort of semi-reanimator style theme here as well, at least in some regards. We might want some sort of payoffs like Marionette Master, but I'm not too sure, because what I think we want to do is be having the ability to find alternate ways to win, in a sense. We don't just want to have the same Disciple of the Vault win conditions here, at least in my opinion. It'll be fun to come up with something a little less, oh, this is the most obvious way that you could build this and it'll be broken or whatever. Let's find another way to put this deck together and win with this deck and win with this strategy. So I think that sounds kind of cool. So I'm going to go away, going to build myself a list, going to put it up here on screen for you guys to sort of see, and, you know, we'll discuss a bit of it, and the deck list will be in the description afterwards. But I'll come back in a little bit and show you what I've done. If you're enjoying the content here, you can join the Squirrel Army by subscribing. Alrighty guys, so after a bit of work here on the list, I've come to 100 cards finally. It was a fair bit over actually when I looked, so yeah, I'm glad that we're at 100 now, and you can see the price that I came to. A bit pricey, obviously, but you can make cuts to some lands and some other things and find some cheaper versions of certain cards and whatnot. So you can get the budget down, and you don't need every single card in here to make it 100% work. But yes, this is a pretty decent pile of cards, though I do say so myself. But yes, I'll put the deck list in the description for those people who are not really interested in seeing the rest of this deck tech. If you just want to check out what the list actually entails, it's all there in the deck, in the description or in the comments below. So yeah, it'll be down there if you want to check that out. But for those people who do want to go through a bit of a discussion about what's actually in this list and what everything kind of does, I'll go through and do that now. So seize the spotlight. I'm going to start here in the sorceries. We basically get our opponents to choose between giving us one of their creatures or giving us a treasure. You know, so those both are really good. We don't really care which option our opponents really choose, because if they give us treasures, then, you know, we've basically helped pay for this spell, which is okay. We just get some, you know, extra treasures so that we can cast other spells, so this spell sort of didn't cost us very much. And if they're silly enough to actually give us one of their creatures, well, we can just take some of their creatures and potentially sacrifice them for our own benefits or whatnot. So them choosing creatures is way worse for them, obviously, unless they don't obviously have creatures on the field. But, you know, that you have to have this timed a little bit, I guess, but that's fine one way or the other. At any rate, even if a player, you know, I guess they can just choose creatures and they don't have creatures, but again, it's still worse for them to choose creatures if they actually have creatures. But yeah, we can do a bit of stuff with the creatures that they give us if we do get them. And if we just get treasures, well, it's kind of a free spell, so we don't really care either way. Make an example. We get our opponents to separate their creatures into 2 piles, and we choose a pile, and we destroy or make them sacrifice the chosen pile or the unchosen pile, whichever. And so, yeah, that's a pretty decent board wipe. Halves our opponent's boards. I'm not going to go through too much of the lands here. I will just say there's a couple of really nice utility lands like Academy Ruins in here for the most part. And the rest is just a whole bunch of fixing lands and some basics. So, again, you could cut out some of the more fixing lands or some of the more expensive lands for more basics or even just tap lands if you're on a very heavy budget. And Academy Ruins is a bit of money, so you could cut that too, but I think it's a fairly useful card to get back artifacts. We'll move on to enchantments here. Village Rites, we sacrifice a creature to draw cards. We need that card draw, so sacrificing our creatures, especially a lot of the ones that we do have in here that we're going to recur. We don't really care. Or if we get our opponent's creatures sometimes, which, as I was saying, sometimes does happen or whatnot, then we can just sacrifice our opponent's creatures to draw cards, so it can be very powerful. Thop to Spy Network, we need more bodies on the field sometimes, so this provides us with some bodies. Sometimes, yes, 1 per turn, but that's usually all we need sometimes. And then when we hit, we draw cards, so does 2 things that we kind of want. So I think it was one of the last ones that I might have thought goes in or whatever, but still, I thought it was fine. Phyrexian Reclamation, we return a creature from our graveyard to our hand, so that's really useful on creatures that don't recur from the graveyard too easily. We need to get those creatures back into a position so that we can recast them and re-sacrifice them and whatnot. Open the Graves, when a non-token creature we control dies, we get a zombie. So that's nice, just provides us with extra fodder and whatnot, extra blockers, extra attackers, whatever we need, or just things to sack, whatever. It's all good. We can just do with whatever we want with those. Go through the instants here. Voter's Hunger, very much like Make an Example, except it's an instant. It's mostly going to do the same thing. That or it's just going to edict people, so that's alright as well. Svat's Will, we make our opponents choose the biggest creature they've got. They have to sacrifice it. If we've got our commander, we choose both these modes. Or we get to exile our opponent's graveyards and get thralls equal to the biggest thing that we exile. So if we get both of these modes, it's really good. If we get either one of these modes, it's okay, but getting both is way better, obviously. Then just resculpt a Reality Shift Baleful Mastery for some good targeted removal and whatnot. So, yep, that's pretty much that there. I'll go through the artifacts since there's less artifacts to talk about. I won't talk about too many of the mana rocks for the most part because it's just like good mana rocks and whatnot, so there's not much to say there. Bolus Citadel, look at the top card. You can play the top card of your library and pay life equal to its cost, and you can sacrifice 10 permanents to make each opponent lose 10 life. That 10 life thing is the thing that we pretty much care about the most, though the card advantage and whatnot is nice. And you might need ways to sort of gain life or gain a bit more life with this, but it's fine for the most part, so we don't really mind because we're going to deal 20 damage to our opponents, so that's the idea here. We're going to sacrifice a whole bunch of stuff to do a whole bunch of damage all at once. Greaves and Boots are in here, wherever Boots is. So yeah, those are in here to protect our commander and keep it around. Liquid Metal Talk, I will say, is very useful, especially with Resculpt, making any permanent an artifact. Although it doesn't come up a whole lot, is still useful. So Lithoformation, it does a whole bunch of different things. We can copy a target, activated or triggered ability we control, choose new targets for the copy. Copy an instant or sorcery we control, we can choose new targets for the copy. We can copy a permanent spell we control, and the copy becomes the token. So it just does a whole bunch of little things that we would find useful. And, we can do a whole lot with that. So mimic that. Whenever a non-token creature dies, we may exile that card. If we do, we can return each other card exiled with it to our graveyard. And then we can pay 3 to make a copy of the exiled card, and it gains haste and then exile at the end step. So that's useful for, getting rid of some of our opponent's stuff sometimes, or copying some of our opponent's stuff sometimes. Sometimes we'll get a bit stuck with, we're not in green, so, we might as well copy what the green player's doing type thing, because they're always doing a whole lot, or whatever. But anyway, we can get our own value off of this by putting our own things under it and making copies of our own things. And that gives us auto death triggers at the end step as well. So that's very, or the ability to get auto death triggers at the end step or whatnot very easily and whatnot. So that's very useful. There was the boots. What else we got here? Wayfarer's Bauble just for land ramp, and then a Weatherlight completed. Draws us cards and eventually turns into a 5/5 flyer that also scries cards and whatnot. So it does help us out in a lot of ways, and just having a big flyer helps us out as well, especially to protect ourselves from big fires. Brass Dragon. I don't love the whole roll d20s thing, but we need recursion in this deck, and we need it badly. And we also need flyers, because our opponents are going to have flyers a lot of the time, and we need to defend against those flyers. So we need something for them. And when our opponents don't have flyers, we want to have flying. We want to be able to punish our opponents who don't have flying and remind them how good flying is. So yes, getting back those creatures is so worth it. Even if it's a little bit slow, it is so worth it. Apprentice Necromancer, very cheap card in terms of mana value, and even in terms of dollars, really. But we can just sacrifice it to return another creature from our graveyard to the battlefield. Gains haste at the beginning of the next end step. We sacrifice that creature. But that's alright, We want to keep looping these things in and out of our graveyards and whatnot. Arashi Burning Sky, when it dies, we can either exile the top 2 cards of our library until end of our next turn. We may play those cards, or we may create 3 treasure tokens. Both of those modes are pretty good. We get card advantage, or we get ramp. And if we can keep bringing this back, it's well worth it. Bloodghast just returns from the graveyard if we play lands. And if someone has 10 or less life, it has haste, but that's not very relevant. All we're trying to do here is loop it in and out of our graveyard with some of the sacrifice and other triggers that we've got going on. The Launderer, whenever a creature we control dies, he connives. And then when he dies, we return another non-rogue creature card with lesser power from our graveyard to the battlefield. So that is very useful when he dies. So that's nice. But just the whole conniving when our stuff dies, which means we get to draw a card and then discard a card. So we get that card selection going on. Very, very useful. Carrion Feeder, just here to sacrifice things. It eventually gets a whole bunch of counters on it, but that's not what we really care about. Trainer Dementia Master, he gives Nightmares +1/+1, which is relevant for his ability, which is to resurrect creatures from our graveyard and make them nightmares in addition to their other types. But when he leaves the battlefield, we remove all nightmares from the game, but that's fine. We're just trying to get that recursion going yet again It is, again, a lot of mana really to get this going, but once you get it going, it's very, very powerful. The Conscript enters the battlefield tapped. We don't really care about that, but we can return it from our graveyard to the battlefield only if a non-skeleton creature died this turn. So that's very easy conditions to meet for the most part, so we don't really worry about that. The Chef, we can sacrifice an artifact or creature to draw a card, so that's very, very useful for us. We need that card draw. The Necromancer, we sacrifice it to return another creature from our graveyard to the field. Very powerful. Gravecrawler, we can just return it from the graveyard as long as we control a zombie. I think we could have a few other zombies in this deck and whatnot. So, and some things also make zombie tokens and whatnot. So, very useful. The Haruspex, whenever a non-token creature we control dies, we draw a card. Really useful. Harvest of Souls. Same thing, except it's bigger and has Death Touch. Hell's Caretaker, we sacrifice it to return a creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield, but we can only do it during our upkeep. Junji, when it dies, we can choose one of two. Target opponent discards 2, it loses 2 life. That's not that important for the most part, but could be useful here and there. Or we can put target non-dragon creature card from our graveyard onto the battlefield under our control and lose 2 life. So that's what we really want, plus just cycling this in and out of our graveyard over and over and whatnot. So, yep. Kakusho, when it dies, each opponent loses 5 life. We gain 5 life, or we gain life equal to the life lost this way, so that can stack up quite a bit. The Emporium Master, when at the beginning of our end step, we create a treasure token for each creature that died this turn, so we can kill a whole bunch of our creatures or whatnot and make a whole bunch of treasure for next turn so that we can do a whole bunch more stuff next turn. So pretty useful. Midnight Reaper, when a non-token creature we control dies, Midnight Reaper deals the damage to us and then we draw a card. So we need that card draw. Machias, gives all our stuff undying, so whenever it dies, it comes back with a +1/+1 counter. We don't really care about some things because they can easily recur themselves, but the things that can't recur themselves, we want this for, so that we don't have to think about trying to recur them through other methods. Again, it's pretty expensive, but it's definitely well worth it. Muldrifter, just sacrifice it or evoke it and essentially sacrifice it and draw 2 cards. We can also sacrifice it essentially while it's on the stack, while the evoke trigger is still on the stack, so that's a bit weird, but then you can get even more out of it. But I just thought we needed more card draw. I think it's one of the last cards that I did add, so yeah, it's just kind of there for now. The Nightskate Familiar, red and blue spells cost 1 less to cast, so that's okay. We can regenerate it. And, those type of spells that we're reducing, they aren't much of our deck, but they aren't nothing of our deck. So we definitely want to have that sort of thing to help us make more mana and have more mana for other things that we need. Port of Ulamog, whenever a non-token creature dies, we make a Eldrazi spawn creature with we can sacrifice it to add colors to our mana pool. So ramps us, just one of the greatest cards for this sort of strategy. Professional Facebreaker. We basically want this for the sacrifice treasures to exile the top card of our library, and we can play it this turn. But still, it's really useful whenever we deal combat damage to a player, we make a treasure. So, and we do make some treasures here and there in other ways and whatnot, but I think this is the main way that we do make them. But still, we want to get treasures and we want to get card advantage, so this does both those things, so really good. Debasa, when it attacks, you may put target creature card from defending player's graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. So we can steal our opponent's stuff from their graveyards, and it has Encore, so we get a copy of it for each opponent, and then we get one of their cards, and we can do all kinds of things, as I said, sacrifice their creatures and whatnot to gain benefits. Reassembling Skeleton just returns from the graveyard and whatnot. The Technomancer enters the battlefield. We may sacrifice another creature. If we do, we create a number of treasure tokens equal to that creature's power. And then we can pay 3, sacrifice X artifacts to return target creature card with power X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So that's really, really useful. Helps us ramp a little bit. Or helps us get mana out of our creatures or whatnot, or even some of our opponent's creatures. And then we can sacrifice some artifacts if we don't really need those artifacts anymore, or if we can sort of flicker things or keep making more and more artifacts and whatnot to return things. So yeah, it can be really good. Cedris unearth stuff, so essentially just return stuff from the graveyard to the battlefield. But we have to exile at the beginning of the next end step, but they do gain haste. But, you know, if we don't, if we sacrifice them or whatever, they don't have to get exiled, so gets around it or whatever, so that's fine. Sepulchral Primordial enters the battlefield. For each opponent, we may put up to 1 target creature card from their graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. So again, more stealing stuff, more we'll sacrifice their stuff for value and whatnot. Sifter of Skulls, whenever a non-token creature we control dies, we make a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi we can sacrifice it to add colorless or whatever. Skyclave Shade, we can, whenever we play a land, we can basically cast it from our graveyard, so we just want to get it back and cycle it in and out. Smothering Abomination, at the beginning of upkeep, we sacrifice a creature. Whenever we sacrifice a creature, we draw a card. So really useful. Tenacious Underdog, play it from our graveyard using its blitz cost, so that's really useful. And if we cast it for its blitz cost, when it dies, we draw a card. So yeah, that's really useful. Viscera, sacrifice a creature to scry 1, and Woe Strider enters the battlefield, makes it go, and we can sacrifice a creature to scry 1, and we can also escape it. But that's fine. We don't really care about escaping it too much, but it is still useful. And that is the list. So yeah, that is what we've got here to work with, and yeah, I hope you guys find the deck interesting. I've certainly found it interesting to try to build this. This isn't a perfect deck by any means, but it is a deck, and you could probably pick it up and play it and go for your life. I think the commander is quite cool. Maybe I've got too much of one thing here or too little of another thing there, but hey, I still think it's pretty decent and would win some games. But you guys can let me know what you think. Write your thoughts down there in the comments below. I'll be sure to hear from you down there if I can. But if I can't, hopefully I will talk to you in the next one.